Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope that you're having a good first week of school, although it has been a really weird and sort of rough week for the rest of the country, and that includes you. So I'm sure that you're still wondering about some things, particularly, I hope, this class. Now, the name of this class is Persuasion in Social Movements. So obviously, it is about that very thing that we saw supposedly on Wednesday, January 6th. Of course, most people would tell you that the definition of a social movement is a little bit different, but one of the first things I like to start off with is the idea that the biggest and oldest and still functioning social movement ever in history, ever in the world, is the American experiment of democracy. If you think about it, a collective group of people moved from one part of the world to another for the sole purpose of dividing themselves away from and separating themselves away from the king to start a new form of government. Now, it's not quite that simple because, of course, people say, well, no, it was really religion. But be it religious values or governmental values or just simply not liking the king, those values are the same things that drive social movements. So it was based on values. It was driven by a group of organized people who somehow managed to make it over across the pond, as we like to say, to America and start something different and start at the highest levels of that something being different. And so, in a way, our own government is a social movement. At least it started out that way. And that is one of the reasons why this class is so interesting to me most of the time. Because as someone who studies politics, you would think I'd be interested in what the president has to say, what Congress has to say, how we vote. And of course, I'm interested in those things. But I'm actually mostly interested in how any of us decide to communicate with our government as citizens. How do we communicate with our government? How do we construct ourselves with our language as part of or outside of that government or that social system? That's always been my driving question as a researcher. And so this class actually gives us an opportunity to explore some of that in a more formalized way. You may be thinking there's nothing formal about this class, and you're partially right. Thus my plaid and my supernatural necklace that I'm wearing, right? There's nothing formal about this, aside from the fact that my name is, has a DR in front of it, and that's about it. So the question is, where does that formality come from? How do we go about studying persuasion and social movements, which is inherently chaotic? How do we study that in a systematic or organized way? Well, it's actually not as hard as you think. Usually, the first thing we have to do is start off with some sort of definition. Those of you who are in my 350 class know this already. I already gave you that lecture. For this class, our definition is not of rhetoric. That's not what we're most interested in. We're most interested in how do we define a social movement. I heard Joe Biden, President-elect Joe Biden, say last week, do not call these people protesters. This is not a protest. Now, protests and social movements are generally seen as very similar things because usually protests are or campaigns are part of the larger social movement. We heard other people refer to it as a movement of people who wanted to reject or overturn the ballots or to have them recounted or to do some sort of policy, enact some sort of policy to look at the ballots again because they did not trust how those ballots were counted or how they came about. So we have two competing narratives that claim that they are social movements, that they are movements in of themselves. And President-elect Biden said, whatever you do, don't call them protesters. Don't call them, essentially what he was saying is don't call them a movement. And one of the reasons why someone might say, hey, that's not a movement, don't call that a movement, is because some people don't believe that you can use violence in a social movement. Other people believe that there is a huge difference between a social movement that is trying to change things for the better, and a social movement that's simply trying to overturn a decision that's already been made. Some people, like, they don't see that as a new way of doing things or a new policy. Some people look at social movements as only involving words, not actions, such as taking over the Capitol. Now, some of you are going to agree or disagree with some of those. I do. I'm going to tell you right now that I think an inherent part of a social movement is space, like where you get to go, which is going to lead us to a conversation about online hashtag movements as they are. So this class is going to literally be utilizing every type of media, every type of communication, from the interpersonal through the mass communication channels. We have to understand all of that in order to follow what social movements do by first looking at what they look like. So we're going to start off with a definition by some of my favorite authors. And this book, it's still around. It's considered one of the first books on social movements. It's very, very good. It's by Stuart Smith and Denton. That's Stuart, like Stuart Smith, and Denton, as in like the town down in near Dallas, Denton. Okay. Stuart Smith and Denton came up with a description of a social movement that calls it an organized collectivity. So that's the first part of it, is it's an organized collectivity, which means that it has to be many people. There can't be two people. That's not a collectivity. So it's an organized collectivity. It is uninstitutionalized. Now, what do we mean by uninstitutionalized? At the time this book was originally written, the definition uninstitutionalized meant it was not part of the government. It was not part of the governmental system. Now, today, well, since 1973, honestly, we've had a little bit of a question about that because, at least since 1973, perhaps further back, but since 1973, at least, we've had the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, and they are part of the government. They are what established the EPA, the Environmental Protection, what's the A for? Agency. So the EPA was developed out of these two orders, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and those two came from, you guessed it, the Clean Air Movement and the Clean Water Movement, which were part of the larger environmental movement. And today we still have an environmental movement attempting to make changes. So even though the EPA is quote unquote institutionalized, there's still a movement that's functioning against it. However, what is important is that a social movement has to have opposition. There has to be something that you are opposing or that is opposing you as a movement. And in the case of the environment, it's not that there's, the Clean Water Act is threatened because of the EPA. There is a natural enemy out there for those who are involved in the environmental movement, and that's the environment. It is constantly changing and we're constantly affecting it. And so therefore policies need to be changed. And because this EPA was created by a movement, it's not something that is legislated that easily unless it has a movement behind it. Therefore, the movement lives on, despite the agency being institutionalized. Okay. So we could talk more about that in a minute. The third thing is that it has to be large in scope. Okay, I think the example that the book uses, it's been like 8 years since I've read it, but I think that the example the book uses is if you have one person marching for 1,000 hours, you don't have a movement. But if you have 1,000 people marching for an hour, you have a movement. It has to be large in scope and in scale, right? So I'm not just saying that it has to be more than 10,000 people, because in Nixa, Missouri, where there's only 19,000 people, if you got 10,000 people to do something, that's half the freaking town. Like, that's a huge movement. So maybe only 15 or 20 people in a town that small or in a community that's smaller is large in scope comparatively. This is why national movements require things like Million Men Marches. I'm sorry, that's what it was called. So ignore the incorrect usage there, or the Million Woman March. I think we had once too. Again, initial apologies for that. So we get these big numbers. We're like, we have to have these big numbers if we're going to have a national movement. That's actually true. So it has to be large in scope and it has to have a large reach too. So large in scope and a large reach, meaning that get numbers and you're affecting a lot of content. Generally, you're using mass media for that. Okay, so it's all of that together. And of course, a large in scope and such. When we talk about large, that means the larger we get, the harder it is to communicate. So, how is it that social movements are formed, and then how are they grown, and how are they maintained? Those are the questions that really need to be answered. How do we keep people in these social movements, and how do we keep them going, and how do we get messages out to all of the people we're supposed to get the messages out to? And of course, these days it's much easier than it was back when I was in college and they used to have to mail us letters and ask for checks for money. Nowadays you just go on, you type in a text number and you donate to the Hurricane Relief Fund and you're done, which is kind of nice and kind of helpful. But it's also blurred the lines about what is a campaign, what is a social movement, and what is a political issue movement. So let's talk about the next defining factor, which is it promotes or opposes changes in societal norms and values. And this is where we get into what I was talking about at the beginning of this video, that idea of values. It somehow opposes those values or it wants to reproduce them. Okay, bring them back perhaps, or make sure that they don't go away, preserve them in some way. What are some of these things that we have seen, and do they count as movements based under that particular part of the definition? The answer is yes. If you look at any lifestyle movement at all, and I say lifestyle movement because it's not a life choice movement, it's a lifestyle movement in that, there are two competing values. People believe that people are born gay, for example. Others believe that they choose to be gay. I'm on the side of you're born that way, but that's not just because I like Gaga. I've just always kind of felt that way. So I don't really, I can't affiliate with people who are like, I chose this. Partially, I think because social movements are so highly contextual. That's not part of the definition, but it's sort of a side note for you. They're highly contextual. You all probably don't remember a time where I don't know how to put this, where your everyday life was challenged because you knew someone who was gay, or because you were gay or queer yourself, or because there was a shooting of a group of people defined by either their gender choices or their who they choose to have sex with, or I don't know. Yeah, where they go to the bathroom, right? We just had that a couple years ago. But there are battles about it, and there are some really, really terrible instances of people getting bullied to the point of suicide, or people getting beat to death, or people getting shot. But when I was younger, back in the late 70s and early 80s, if you you never said that you were gay or queer, you couldn't come out. It just wasn't done, and that was the only way to preserve your life. Nowadays, it's something that I think the whole world has been working on, figuring out how to live with. So there may be a movement to go back to the way things were. There may be a movement to help alleviate these tensions. There's movements all over the world trying to do different things with the debate, the fight, I'll say, about LGBTQA rights. Okay, so when it was during the late 70s and early 80s, you used the term gay to mean happy, and you used the term queer to call somebody a bad name. It was not used. And then as I grew older, the word gay became in vogue and the right thing to say. And then it was heterosexual, and then that became No, that's too essentializing. We go with queer. And then I went out. I remember I went out to a movie with five of my friends who all happened to be men, all happened to be gay, and two of them wanted to be called gay, and the other three wanted to be called queer. And the two who wanted to be called gay really had a problem with the word queer. I just started calling them my boys, which sounded even more derogatory to me, but they were all like, yeah, we can accept that. We found an agreement somehow in that. And that's okay because we all have that right to self define. But there was no defining going on in the 70s and 80s. None at all. We didn't discuss it. That did not happen. You had an uncle who was forever a bachelor. That's what that meant. That was the code word. Okay. They had to sneak off into the dark. They could not show their faces. They could not walk down the street hand in hand. None of that would happen. And I'm not saying it's super popular right now to do that here in Missouri, but if you go to New York or you go to any of the bigger cities, Chicago, Pittsburgh, LA, Seattle, wherever it is that you go, maybe even St. Louis, it's been a while since I've been there, Kansas City, you will see, same-sex couples holding hands or walking down the street together or out eating together. And it's just not thought of anymore. Whereas when I was, 6, 7, 8 years old, it was very much thought of. So social movements are contextual because they're based on what is happening at the current time. And they're out to change the status quo. The status quo is where you're at right in that moment. Like right now, where are we? Well, we've got one president who's impeached. We've got another president-elect who hasn't been sworn in yet. We have a really big gap in leadership right now, and it's a really fine opportunity for someone to do something to divide our government. And by that, I mean internationally. So we're in a unique position, one that probably won't happen again. So do we need a social movement to get ourselves out of the situation of having a president-elect and an impeached president? No, we don't need to. We just need to survive the next 7 days. We're getting down to 6 days, thank God. But we need to survive those 6, 7 days so that all the parties can come back together. And by parties, I mean people, all of the people who have an interest in this, which of course is you and me as citizens, which of course does mean those in official government. But this immediate moment is so different and so unique that I can't even tell you what's going to happen next. Nobody can. It's very disturbing in some cases. I mean, I'm smiling, but I'm not happy. This is not my happy smile. This is my, I'm scared to death and I don't know what to say smile because I've got an 11-year-old daughter and that's how I have to look when I'm scared, right? You can't look scared when you've got an 11-year-old. I don't know if any of you have children, but you can't look scared around an 11-year-old. You have to look like, we got this. It's good. I'm not really sure that it is. You guys aren't 11, so I think I can say with honesty that I don't really know that everything is okay or that it will be okay. What I can tell you is that our country has suffered greater strife. Yes, when we came over from Great Britain, when we left England, when we were the first Brexit, we were the original Brexit. That was a movement. If you think the current Brexit was a movement, we were also a movement, right? We're breaking off, we're making an exit, however you want to define that for yourself, that's a movement based on the values of the people who were requesting change of the status quo. What's the next one? And as you can tell, I'm totally cheating with my phone over here. Sorry. I didn't memorize all of these. But the next one is encounter opposition in a moral struggle. You have to encounter opposition in a moral struggle, according to Stuart Smith and Denton. I think I'm okay with that, although I don't know that it's always a moral struggle. Some people say that all human struggles are moral in some way or another. I think they're all definitely qualified as either good, bad, or otherwise. So in that sense, yeah, sure. Engaged in a moral struggle. Definitely in our most recent examples and the ones that I've used today, there is definitely a moral struggle. For the people who started this country, it was, do we have to worship the king when we're supposed to be worshiping a god? How does that work? And no matter what your religious affiliation is, that's just history. They didn't want to worship a king anymore. They wanted to make sure that they were worshiping the right entity. And so they did. They moved on. They went past it. That was definitely a moral debate, a moral dilemma. All right. The next one which is the last one, is that persuasion within the movement is pervasive. We're not trying to get a message to three people. We're not trying to get, and we're not just informing people. That's what education is for. We're actually trying to motivate people to action. And that is constant in the movement. You are constantly trying to keep people, either maintain them inside the movement, keep them in the movement, or gain new membership, or promote your cause, or do fundraising. It doesn't matter. Persuasion is pervasive in every part of that. So, according to Stuart Smith and Denton, social movements have to have certain qualities. Those qualities are that they are a collective action. I'm going to try to find a way to put this in one sentence. A collective action organized against an I'm sorry, let me skip that. Can I just erase that? Can we just delete everything that just happened? Be kind, rewind. All right, let's start again. How about this? An organized collectivity, an organized collectivity that is uninstitutionalized, large in scope, promotes or opposes change in values, encounters opposition, and is pervasive in persuasion. That would be the best way to put that. So hopefully you got all those different components there. Those are the components that we're going to start with, because to start a discussion about anything so that we can learn, we have to have something to sort of pin it against. Forgive me, we need opposition, but we do. We need something to start with. So we're going to start with that. And what I'm going to be doing for you is giving you readings online. We're going to be having discussions on the discussion board because that's the only way we can do it. And we're going to be not taking exams so much as just doing things that I think will help us demonstrate an understanding of how social movements work and what works and what doesn't, how persuasion plays the key role in that. That's what we're going to do for the entirety of the semester. Now, knowing what I just read you, the question becomes, is it possible that what happened last Wednesday, January 6th, at the Capitol was a social movement? Well, let's look at this for a second. Were they organized? You know, some people are saying no. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. There are people screaming, "You want to break that window?" And, you know, it's a little bit disturbing. I've heard some of the news faces on the news. You know, I don't know that I would call them reporters necessarily, but I've seen some of the news, let's say, hosts and hostesses. I've seen them say things like, how do these people know where to go in the Capitol? It's a very complicated building. You know what? They're right. Like, I told my mother the other day, I said, I don't even understand. She goes, well, your brother was like, yeah, I've been in the rotunda. And I was like, yeah, almost, you know, anybody who's been to DC probably has visited the rotunda. But only one of us in our family has ever been down in the catacombs, as I like to call them, because I went to a cocktail party down there with a senator from Oklahoma, and I went to go to the bathroom. That was all I needed to do, was use the restroom, and I got lost. I mean, that's silly, right? It sounds ridiculous. Of course, that's ridiculous. I wasn't 10. I was pushing 30. Okay. And so at the time. And so I got lost because there are dark tunnels underneath the Capitol that go out. And why? Because the Capitol has been attacked in the past. 1861, I believe, was when they said the last one was. Don't quote me on that exact date, but it was roughly then, about 1861. It was attacked, and so they made a lot of different tunnels for senators, vice presidents, presidents, etc., whoever, to get out of the Capitol should something like that ever happen again. And here we are. You know, but it's, I don't know how they knew where to go either. It's not exactly easy to get into the Capitol unless you know how to get into the Capitol, right? Either you're going through the main doors, but if you're going in another door, I don't know. I couldn't tell you how to do it, but these people knew. So was it organized? It seems like it might have been organized. And I had, I am embarrassed to admit this, but I did go join a couple of different groups for the sole purpose of seeing what was going on. And, for weeks prior to January 6th, they were saying, let's go attack the Capitol. Now, I imagine that most people were like me, like, that's not going to happen. That's crazy talk. Like, no one would do that. Like, sure, talk about it, be pissed, but you're not going to do it. We never do these things that we talk about. And we were very, very wrong because it happened. And so, was it organized? It seems like maybe it wasn't organized, and it was definitely a collective action. I mean, I think they're saying that there were thousands of people there, and one person said tens of thousands, which I guess, I mean, I didn't see the whole crowd. I don't know. I mean, if it was tens of thousands, that's even scarier, of course. Or are they uninstitutionalized? Of course they are. They are fighting against the institution. In fact, they're fighting to overturn an election or to revisit that election or to recount a vote that's already been done by the institution. So it's definitely uninstitutionalized. Is it large in scope? Like I said, I believe that it was. Does it promote or oppose changes in societal norms? Well, our societal norms are generally we have an election, it gets counted. Nobody ever has known what January 6th was. I mean, I could give 5,000 civics exams and ask what's important about January 6th every 4 years. And people were like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many people would get that right prior to this year. So I guess in a way it taught us something. But for those of us who are nerds who have watched the counting of the ballots or the certification of the ballots, this was incredibly shocking. The norm is nobody's there, nobody cares. Everything's fine. You just go in with these boxes, they open them up, they read them off by state, and you're done. And that's not what happened. So is it a challenge to societal norms? Yes, they wanted a recount, or they wanted to overturn the election, or they wanted Mike Pence to violate the Constitution. I am not really sure what all the demands were, but it seems like they were definitely going against what we normally do. Um, did it encounter opposition and a moral struggle? I would say yes. 5 people died. And there's a lot of debate about whether that's bad. I don't know why there would be a debate about that. Dead people, no matter who they are, that's not, it's not pleasant. It's not good. This is the first time in my life I take that back. 9/11, 2001, of course, was the first time I saw people die on live television, but I was pretty far away from it. Like the view was from a building, in New York, and then you're watching people jumping out of the windows and such. And so it was a little bit different. It was a little more movie like, a little more unreal. This time around, you're watching and you're literally watching someone's son get beaten to death right in front. I mean, right in front of the Capitol. I forget that it's in front of the Capitol. I don't care where it is. I can't watch that. Right. So, were there still some shocking things that could happen? Absolutely. Was there a moral struggle? Yeah. If it gets to the point where people are getting hurt, I would say stop. Some people would say stop. Some people would say, no, that's the whole point. And I get that too. So it's definitely a moral debate. Is persuasion pervasive in that movement? I mean, it seems like the message stuck around. But then there are others who would say that they were not using persuasion. They were using coercion. Some people would argue that violence in a social movement makes it not a social movement. It's not very social if you're killing people or hurting people. So that's a debate that we'll have during this semester as well. Here's how I'd like to start this out, besides me talking for a half hour, which, by the way, to give you an idea, I was like, oh, dear God, I've been going on forever. I really need to close this out. And then I looked at the clock and it says I've been on for 29 minutes. Even I'm boring myself right now. Okay, so that's the textbook stuff that we're going to do. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to put up a discussion board, and I would like you all to respond. Let's say, I don't know if I have a date for when I want you to respond on the syllabus or not, but I'm going to go ahead and just say the 21st, which is a week from now. By the 21st, by 5 p.m. on the 21st, I would like you to write a paragraph, not even just a couple of sentences, doesn't have to be crazy. Anything was, I'm going to call it an attack. I don't know. That seems like a loaded word. What word do I want to use? Here's how I'll do it. Were the events of January 6th last week, were the events of January 6th, 2021, part of a social movement? Yes or no? Why or why not? Okay, pretty simple. That's your assignment for next week. In the meantime, I will be throwing up readings for you. That sounded bad. I'm going to be posting them online for you so that you can read them. They are intended to supplement things and to help you have a basis for the kind of study that we're doing this semester. So you have topics each week that I will be addressing and talking about. This week's topic, I believe, was introduction. There's your introduction. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, questions, comments, complaints can be sent to me via email, but I am terrible with email. But I do get to it. I'm not saying I never look at it. That's a fine way to reach me. Another way is to use my cell phone number. It's on the syllabus. You can text or call anytime. If I'm awake and not busy, I will answer immediately. Otherwise, I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Some people have emailed me and then texted me and said, "Hey, I emailed you," to make sure that I go check for that specific email in case, I've checked my email for the day and I'm not getting back to it until tomorrow and you would rather I look for it now. That's fine as well. All I ask is that you tell me who you are and what class it's for. That's all I ask. All right. You all have a safe week. We will meet back again. Well, meet. You'll get something from me very soon. Until then, read what I post. Take notes on this video if you didn't, and look to the Blackboard discussion board for your assignment. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.